Shy teacher bullied by students, her husband taught them a shocking lesson. A story by Heartfelt Tales. The classroom fell silent as Mrs. Sarah Chen watched her lesson plan crumble before her eyes. The three boys in the back row, Jake, Marcus, and Tyler, had just finished their latest performance, a cruel imitation of her soft-spoken teaching style that had the entire class snickering. Her hands trembled as she clutched her notes, the words on the page blurring through unshed tears. What started as simple disruptions had escalated into daily humiliation, and Sarah felt more helpless with each passing day. If this story resonates with you, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, commenting with your thoughts, and subscribing to Heartfelt Tales for more inspiring stories like this one. Sarah had always been the quiet type. Even as a child, she preferred books to crowds, whispered conversations to loud debates. When she became a high school English teacher 5 years ago, she thought her gentle approach would help students feel safe and understood. For most of her classes, it worked beautifully. Students opened up about their struggles, found their voices through poetry and writing, and many even stayed after class just to talk about life. But this year was different. This year, she had Jake Morrison in her third period class. Jake was 17, tall and athletic, with the kind of natural charisma that drew followers. His parents were wealthy donors to the school, and everyone knew it. Marcus and Tyler, his loyal companions, fed off his energy like moths to a flame. Together, they had turned Sarah's classroom into their personal entertainment venue. It started small. Jake would interrupt her mid-sentence with exaggerated yawns. Marcus would accidentally knock books off his desk whenever Sarah turned to write on the board. Tyler would ask mock-innocent questions designed to derail her lessons. The other students, caught between fear and the desire to fit in, either joined in the laughter or sat in uncomfortable silence. Sarah tried everything she could think of. She spoke to them privately after class, only to be met with fake apologies and promises that were broken by the next day. She assigned them extra work, which they either ignored or completed with obvious disdain. She even moved their seats, but they found ways to continue their disruption from any corner of the room. The worst part wasn't the pranks or the interruptions. It was the way they mimicked her. Jake had perfected an impression of her quiet teaching voice, complete with her nervous habits of adjusting her glasses and tucking her hair behind her ear. He would perform this routine whenever she stepped out of the room, sending the class into fits of laughter. When she returned, she could feel the residual giggles and see the smirks, even though she never witnessed the performances herself. Sarah's confidence crumbled with each passing day. She began second-guessing every word she spoke, every gesture she made. Her lesson plans, once creative and engaging, became rigid and defensive. She stopped encouraging class discussions, knowing they would be derailed. She stopped sharing her passion for literature, knowing it would be mocked. The teacher she had worked so hard to become was disappearing, replaced by a shell of anxiety and dread. At home, Sarah tried to hide her struggles from her husband, David. David Chen was everything Sarah wasn't: confident, outgoing, and unafraid to take up space in the world. He worked as a mechanical engineer, but his real passion lay in martial arts. He had been practicing Taekwondo since childhood and now taught classes at a local dojo 3 evenings a week. Where Sarah solved problems with patience and understanding, David believed in direct action and clear boundaries. For weeks, Sarah came home with forced smiles and deflected David's questions about her day. She made excuses for working late, staying in her classroom long after the final bell to avoid facing the next day's challenges. She graded papers with shaking hands and wrote lesson plans through tears she refused to shed in front of her students. But David knew his wife too well to be fooled for long. He noticed how she flinched when her phone buzzed with school notifications. He saw how she stared blankly at the television, lost in worried thoughts. He watched her grow thinner and more withdrawn, the vibrant woman he married fading a little more each day. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in November. Sarah arrived home later than usual, her eyes red-rimmed and her hands still trembling. David was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he heard her car in the driveway. He waited for the sound of her key in the door, but minutes passed in silence. Concerned, he looked out the window to find Sarah sitting in her car, gripping the steering wheel and sobbing. David dropped the wooden spoon he was holding and ran outside. He opened the driver's door and knelt beside his wife, his heart breaking at the sight of her pain. Without a word, he gathered her into his arms and held her as she cried 5 weeks' worth of suppressed tears. "They filmed it," Sarah whispered against his shoulder. "Today, Jake filmed Marcus doing his impression of me and posted it on social media. Half the school has seen it by now." The comments. "David, the things they're saying about me." David's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning." That night, over cups of tea in their living room, Sarah finally shared the whole story. She told David about the daily humiliations, the way the boys had systematically destroyed her confidence and turned her classroom into a battleground. She described the fake tears Marcus had produced when she tried to discipline him, the way Tyler would spread rumors about her favoritism towards certain students, and how Jake orchestrated it all with the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced real consequences. David listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Sarah finished, she looked at him with exhausted eyes. "I don't know what to do anymore," she admitted. "The administration says they're monitoring the situation, but nothing changes. These boys know exactly how far they can push without crossing any official lines. I'm starting to think I should just quit teaching altogether." "No," David said firmly. "You're not quitting. You're an incredible teacher, Sarah. I've seen how your students from previous years light up when they see you around town. I've read the thank you notes they've sent you. You're not the problem here, those boys are. And it's time someone taught them that actions have consequences." Sarah shook her head. "What can we do? The school won't listen, their parents have too much influence, and I can't fight them the way they're fighting me." David was quiet for a long moment, then he smiled, not his usual warm smile, but something sharper and more determined. "Leave that to me," he said. "But I need you to do something for me first. Tomorrow, I want you to go to school and teach like you used to. Don't let them see that they've broken you. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. The next morning, David made a phone call to the school. He introduced himself to the principal as Sarah's husband and requested a meeting to discuss the ongoing situation in his wife's classroom. His tone was professional but carried an undertone that suggested this was not a request that could be easily dismissed. Meanwhile, Sarah stood in front of her classroom mirror, trying to summon the teacher she used to be. When the bell rang and students filed in, Jake, Marcus, and Tyler took their usual seats in the back row, ready for another day of entertainment. But something was different about Mrs. Chen today. She stood straighter, spoke clearer, and when Jake started his usual interruption, she looked him directly in the eye and continued speaking as if he hadn't said a word. When Marcus knocked over his books, she didn't flinch or pause her lesson. When Tyler asked one of his derailing questions, she gave a brief, professional answer and moved on. The boys were confused by this change in their favorite target, but they adapted quickly. If Mrs. Chen wanted to play harder to rattle, they'd simply escalate their game. During lunch period, David arrived at the school for his meeting with Principal Roberts. What the principal expected was a typical parent conference: complaints, pleas for intervention, maybe some threats to involve the school board. What he got was something entirely different. David had done his homework. He arrived with printed copies of the social media posts featuring his wife, screenshots of the cruel comments, and a detailed timeline of every incident Sarah had reported to the administration. But more importantly, he brought something else: a comprehensive knowledge of the school's anti-bullying policies, harassment protocols, and legal obligations to provide a safe working environment for staff. "Mr. Roberts," David began, his voice calm and professional, "my wife has been subjected to systematic harassment by 3 students in her third-period class. This harassment has now extended to social media, creating a hostile work environment that violates both school policy and state education law." Principal Roberts, a middle-aged man who had grown comfortable with managing problems through bureaucratic delays and careful non-action, found himself facing a parent who spoke his language: policy, documentation, and legal liability. David continued, "I'm not here to demand that you expel these students or to threaten lawsuits. I'm here to inform you that this situation ends today. My wife will be filing a formal complaint with the district office this afternoon, and I'll be personally ensuring that every incident moving forward is documented and reported to the appropriate authorities. But before we go that route, I'd like to offer an alternative solution." The principal leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "What kind of alternative?" "I'd like to speak to the boys. Just a conversation. Nothing official, nothing disciplinary from the school's perspective. Just one adult talking to 3 young men about respect and consequences." Principal Roberts frowned. "Mr. Chen, I can't allow you to confront students. That could create liability issues for the district." "I'm not talking about confrontation," David replied smoothly. "I'm talking about education. You see, I teach martial arts in the evenings. These boys have been acting like bullies because no one has ever shown them what real strength looks like. I'd like to correct that misconception." After 20 minutes of careful negotiation, Principal Roberts found himself agreeing to David's unusual request. The boys would be called to a conference room under the pretense of a peer mediation session with Mrs. Chen's husband, supervised by the vice principal from a distance. An hour later, Jake, Marcus, and Tyler slouched into the conference room, expecting another pointless adult lecture they could ignore. Instead, they found David Chen waiting for them, a quiet man in a simple button-down shirt who looked more like an accountant than anyone intimidating. "Gentlemen," David said, gesturing to the chairs across from him, "please, have a seat. I wanted to talk to you about my wife." Jake smirked at his friends. This was going to be easier than they thought. "Look, Mr. Chen," Jake began, using the cocky tone that usually made adults back down, "we haven't done anything wrong. Mrs. Chen just can't handle a little joking around. Maybe teaching isn't for her if she's that sensitive." David nodded thoughtfully. "That's interesting perspective, Jake. Tell me, what do you think strength looks like?" The question caught Jake off guard. "What do you mean?" "Strength. Power. What does it look like to you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, what I see are 3 boys who think strength means making someone smaller feel even smaller. Is that what you think being strong means?" Marcus jumped in, emboldened by his friend's bravado. "We're just having fun. It's not our fault she can't take a joke. David leaned back in his chair, studying each boy carefully. You know, I teach martial arts. Have for about 15 years now. And one of the first things we teach is that real strength isn't about overpowering someone weaker than you. Real strength is about protecting people who can't protect themselves. It's about using your power to lift others up, not tear them down. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Look, we get it. You want us to stop messing with your wife. Fine. Whatever. Actually, David said, standing up slowly, I don't think you do get it yet. You see, what you've been doing to my wife isn't just messing around. It's systematic harassment. It's emotional abuse. And it's about to stop completely. Jake stood up too, trying to match David's height but falling short. You can't tell us what to do. Our parents. Your parents, David interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge, are going to be very interested in the documentation I've compiled of your behavior. Including the social media posts, the witness statements from other students, and the detailed records of how your actions have created a hostile work environment for a dedicated teacher. For the first time, the three boys looked uncertain. David continued, but here's what's really going to happen. You're going to go back to that classroom, and you're going to treat my wife with the respect she deserves. Not because I'm threatening you, but because it's the right thing to do. And if you can't manage that basic level of human decency, then you'll discover that actions have consequences, both from the school administration and from your parents, who will be learning some very interesting things about their son's behavior. He paused, letting his words sink in. But more than that, I want you to understand something about strength. Real strength doesn't come from making others feel small. It comes from building others up. It comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's not easy. It comes from treating people with kindness and respect, especially when they're different from you. David walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of Jake, the apparent leader of the group. He didn't raise his voice or make any threatening gestures, but something in his presence, the confidence of a man who knew his own strength and had nothing to prove, made Jake take a step back. My wife is an incredible teacher, David said quietly. She's helped hundreds of students find their voices, discover their potential, and believe in themselves. She's made a difference in more lives than you can imagine. And you three have been treating her like she's worthless. He looked each boy in the eye in turn. That ends today. Not just because I say so, but because you're going to realize that you're better than this. You're going to discover what it actually feels like to be strong, and it has nothing to do with making someone else feel weak. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. What if we wanted to make things right? Like, actually make things right? David smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Now that's the right question. Tell me, what do you think would be a good way to start? What followed was a 20-minute conversation unlike any the boys had experienced before. David didn't lecture them or threaten them. Instead, he helped them understand the impact of their actions and guided them toward their own solutions. By the end of the session, they had developed a plan, not because they were forced to, but because they genuinely wanted to fix what they had broken. The next day, Sarah walked into her third period class expecting the usual chaos. Instead, she found Jake, Marcus, and Tyler waiting by her desk. Jake stepped forward, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by genuine discomfort. Mrs. Chen, he began, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it, we wanted to apologize. For everything. We know we've been bullies. And we want to make it right. What followed was the most genuine apology Sarah had received in her entire teaching career. The boys didn't make excuses or minimize their behavior. They acknowledged the specific ways they had hurt her and explained how they planned to change. Jake even offered to personally address the social media posts, clarifying to his followers that the videos were cruel and wrong. But the real change became evident over the following weeks. Instead of disruption, the boys began participating constructively in class discussions. Marcus, it turned out, had a genuine interest in creative writing that he'd been hiding behind his troublemaker persona. Tyler showed unexpected insights into the novels they were reading. And Jake, once he stopped performing for his audience, revealed a quick wit and natural leadership ability that he began using to help other students rather than tear them down. The transformation wasn't instant or perfect. There were still moments of backsliding, times when old habits resurfaced. But each time, one of the boys would catch himself, or his friends would catch him, and redirect toward better behavior. Sarah watched this change with amazement and growing confidence. As her classroom became a place of learning rather than a battleground, she rediscovered her passion for teaching. Her lessons became engaging again, her discussions thoughtful and deep. She started staying after school not because she was avoiding the next day, but because she was excited to prepare new and creative ways to reach her students. The other students in the class noticed the change too. Without the constant disruption and mockery, they felt safer to participate, to ask questions, to share their thoughts. The classroom culture shifted from one of fear and exclusion to one of respect and genuine learning. 2 months later, something remarkable happened. Jake approached Sarah after class with a request that left her speechless. "Mrs. Chen," he said, "would you be willing to sponsor a peer mediation program? Like, where students who are having conflicts can come and work things out with help from trained student mediators?" Sarah stared at him, remembering the boy who had made her life miserable just weeks before. "Why?" she asked. Jake looked uncomfortable, but determined. "Because I know what it feels like to hurt people now. And I know what it feels like to realize you're better than that. I want to help other kids figure that out before they mess up as badly as we did." The peer mediation program launched that spring, with Jake, Marcus, and Tyler serving as the first trained student mediators. Sarah co-sponsored the program alongside the school counselor, and it quickly became one of the most successful conflict resolution initiatives the school had ever implemented. At the end of the school year, Sarah received a card signed by all 3 boys. Inside, Jake had written, "Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we gave you every reason to. You taught us what real strength looks like, and we'll never forget it." But the real transformation went deeper than just those 3 students. Sarah's experience had taught her something valuable about her own strength. She realized that her quiet, gentle approach to teaching wasn't a weakness to be overcome, it was a strength to be leveraged. She learned to combine her natural empathy with clearer boundaries and more confident communication. David, watching his wife reclaim her confidence and rediscover her passion, felt proud not just of what they had accomplished together, but of what Sarah had accomplished within herself. She had learned that being kind didn't mean being weak, that being gentle didn't mean being powerless. The story of what happened in Sarah's classroom spread throughout the school, though the details became somewhat mythologized in the telling. Some students whispered about the mysterious meeting where 3 of the school's biggest troublemakers had been transformed overnight. Others talked about Mrs. Chen's husband, the martial arts teacher who had somehow convinced the boys to change their ways without raising his voice or making threats. But the real lesson wasn't about David's intervention or even about the boys' transformation. It was about the power of treating people with dignity, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the truth that real strength comes from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. As Sarah stood in front of her classroom on the last day of school, looking at students who had grown and learned and discovered parts of themselves they never knew existed, she realized something profound. The shy teacher who had been humiliated and broken down had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever before. She had learned that true strength wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room, it was about creating space for all voices to be heard. The bullies had learned that real power comes from protecting others, not from preying on them. And in the end, everyone, teacher, students, and even David, had discovered something important about the difference between seeming strong and actually being strong. Thank you for watching this story from Heartfelt Tales. If you found inspiration in Sarah's journey and David's wisdom, please show your support by hitting the like button, sharing this video with someone who might need to hear this message, and leaving a comment below about how this story resonated with you. Don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness, courage, and the strength that comes from lifting each other up. Your support helps us continue sharing these important messages with the world. ****